Ghatotkacha, her son, her and Bhim's son, is also revered as a great character in Nagaland. You look at Menaka. Menaka comes from Arjun's wife. Menaka comes from Manipur. Rukmini comes from Arunachal Pradesh. Kamakhya Mata, the seat of Tantricism, is in Assam.
Namaste everybody, welcome to Citti Media. My name is Citti, your host. In today's current affairs show, we are joined by Rami Desai ji. Rami ji is an author, a political commentator, an expert on insurgency and conflict, and she is a regular television panelist. She appears on Republic TV and different other television channels. She's a commentator, and recently she started Insights with Rami Desai, which goes deep into a lot of political and geopolitical issues. Ramiji, it's so good to have you here with us. Welcome to Citti Media. Namaskar.
Namaskar, Sharan. It is such a privilege for me to be here talking about such important issues. And what a welcome you've given me. I didn't recognize that you were talking about me, so thank you very much. But I'm very glad to be here, and I'm very happy that we're going to be talking about the Northeast.
Absolutely, it's really good to have you here as well. But owing to our format, of course, we had to cut short the introduction, but otherwise there is so much more to tell about you and the work that you've done. But I think that will be pretty evident from the conversation that we are going to have right now. Ramiji brings me to my first question, with your permission, if I may move on to that. In the news recently, first of all, we do not see a lot of news coverage about conflict from the Northeast. And when it does happen, people are not aware about the context in which it is happening. People are not even aware about the history. So there was a violence that broke out in the Assam Mizoram border. What can you tell us about this?
Okay, I'll address your second question before I address your first comment. The Assam Mizoram border and all the borders in the Northeast have been demarcated with the British advent in the region. And these are colonial legacies. The boundaries are colonial legacies of what the British left us. And as we've seen in a lot of places around the world, including on the Northwest frontier as well, that they weren't really good at it. And the same way they weren't really good at cutting borders in the Northeast. It was very simple for them in their head. They cut the hills out and they cut the plains out. So there's a lot of conflict on a lot of the borders, state borders in the Northeast. So this is not exactly very unusual. Of course, we are sitting here in, you're in Bangalore, I'm in Delhi. The rest of India, has not had the Northeast in its collective imagination ever. And there are many reasons for that. And I think that is something that every individual who's concerned about the nation should think and ask themselves, that why is it that the Northeast is not in our imagination? Why is it that we don't know much about it? So coming to your question, the same way, this is not an extraordinary border dispute. These kind of border disputes have been happening for ages, and they've been happening on all the borders. Now with the Assam and Mizoram border, it's a fairly long border. It's, I think, about 165 kilometers. And as you know, Mizoram is hilly, and cultivation is difficult. A lot of industry is difficult because the majority of Mizoram is mountainous. But having said that, Mizoram historically was known as the Lushai Hills, which was a district of Assam. And when they drew the boundary, which was a notification in 1875, it segregated these areas. Now, all these regions are dominated by multiple different tribes. We have to understand India's tribal identity before we understand the Northeast. Now, these tribes sometimes also interwarring tribes. So it's not as if, historically all these tribes have been friendly. not necessarily, But after the border was cut in 1875, there was also another demarcation in 1933. So the argument goes, to explain it very simply to you, that Mizoram feels that Assam follows the 1933 demarcation, and they want them to follow the 1875 one, and that is the area of conflict. But from I haven't been able, because of the pandemic, to travel to the Northeast, though all my work is largely based on field work. It's not a region that you can understand by reading books. It's not a region that you can understand by watching the news. It's a region where you have to spend a lot of time. You have to be on the ground because the minuter, the smaller details are very difficult for us to comprehend because of the tribal identities, because of the languages, because of culture and traditions that we haven't been exposed to. So now on the ground, the news is that this is not really a problem of the BEFR, which is the Bengal Eastern Frontier Regulation, which was the Act of 1873, which demarcated these areas. This is more to do with the fact that they need plain land to cultivate. So a lot of the tribes come down from the hills in Mizoram because it's difficult to cultivate in the mountainous region, and that causes clashes because that land is used for cultivation, which the Assamese side believes historically belongs to them and is for them for cultivation. Also, this is a very, very precarious area. There's Kachar and all. These are traditionally very conflicted areas. There's a lot of smuggling that happens through these areas. There's a lot of timber mafia in these areas. So, not elaborate too much because we're limited on time. The ground reality might be different from what we might be hearing. Of course, the reaction of the Mizoram police with the shootout might, in my opinion, have been very aggressive and unnecessary. But this is a problem that may have historical roots, but this incident is not something that is rooted in historicity. This incident has to do with what is happening on ground right now, which is the fight for plain land, which is good land that can be cultivated. This is maybe there is an influence of the timber mafia, of the smugglers that operate in these areas. But there is another angle to this, which I will explain as we go on.
Absolutely. Thank you for that wonderful introduction to what we're talking about. But, from a security perspective, these conflicts and some of these regions which are undergoing such conflicts pose a threat to national security overall in its ambit. So what more about what you've learned from the Northeast?
Sharon, you're quite right. I think that's a great question because the security perspective in the Northeast does affect the rest of the nation, and that is something we should be very clear about. We as a nation are obsessed with the Northwest frontier, what's happening in Pakistan, what's happening in Afghanistan, how is it going to affect the rest of India, how is it going to affect Jammu and Kashmir, why? The Northeast has borders, that are far larger, which are in conflict, which are porous. And Northeast has had the longest running insurgency in the country, which is the Naga insurgency. We must ask ourselves, why is it that considering the mothership of all insurgencies is in the Northeast, that there is so much of conflict, that we never hear about it in mainstream media. We are not taught about it. Specialists are not focusing on it. Now, here is my reasoning for it. Is the Northeast has a troubled past. The reason it has a troubled past, and this past that I talk about is the past starting from the advent of the British colonialists in the Northeast. Before that, these were tribals. They had very strong connections to the rest of India. How?
Right.
Because if you go back to our scriptures, if you read the Mahabharata, Adi Parv is replete with instances of interactions uh, of the major interactions of the major characters, historical figures in the north, in the Mahabharata with the Northeast. So, for example, you have Dimapur, which is the largest city in Nagaland. Dimapur comes from Hidimba. Hidimba was tribal queen of Dimapur. The tribe that comes from that area called the Dimasas consider themselves as uh, descendants of Hidimba. Ghatotkaч, her son, her and Bhim's son, is also revered as a great character in Nagaland. You look at Menaka. Menaka comes from Arjun's wife. Menaka comes from Manipur. Rukmini comes from Arunachal Pradesh. Kamakhya, Mata, the seat of Tantricism, is in Assam. So I can go on about the kind of connections historically Bharat has had with the Northeast, but somewhere it got lost. Now, where it got lost was when the British entered the Northeast. And I am trying, there are lots of dynamics to this, lots of angles to this. There are a lot of the details, there are a lot of details. I'm trying to make this simple for a layman to understand because it's such a complex region. So when the British won the Battle of Plassey, they set their sights on the Northeast. The Northeast is very rich in minerals, natural resources. Tea cultivation was a major area, So the British decided to enter the Northeast, and there was a huge amount of resistance. So the British advent into the Northeast was not like a simple, walk over. They walked in, took over the tribals, and started converting. There was a lot of resistance. And unfortunately, those resistances, we've never heard about them and we've never learned about them in our history books. But even during independence, the resistance that the Northeast put up against the British was something that it's a shame that we haven't learned about, the kind of historical characters that we have, the kind of independence, freedom fighters that we have. A common man would not even be able to name one, and this all has to do finally with the advent of the British into the Northeast, resulting in the access that was given to the missionaries to come into the Northeast. And this leads to the kind of insurgencies that we see. All the insurgencies that we see in the Northeast are Christian insurgencies.
Yes.
They're not Hindu insurgencies. On the contrary, I'll tell you a difference between how the missionary came in and how the Hindus came in. The difference is when Vaishnavism, for instance, when Vaishnavism came into Manipur, it was a symbiotic relationship with the animistic religion that already existed there. And it produced a higher culture. So today, if you go to Manipur, Manipur has a mixture of Vaishnavism and its indigenous religion that it followed. And they've mixed all of it. It came in with no conflict. Whereas when the missionaries came in, they created an identity. All right, they realized that, okay, we cannot, these tribes are fierce. They are, they're warrior tribes. We cannot take them over by force. I'll give you an example of Nagaland. It took them 100 years to enter Nagaland from the first time the missionary was sent in. And why was the missionary sent in? In other countries, if you look at it, the administration goes in first, the colonialists go in first into an area, and then they bring the missionaries. In Nagaland, the resistance was such that the administration couldn't enter. So they said, okay, we have to give them an identity. So they sent in the missionaries. And missionaries were so driven that they gave them a completely new identity. The Naga is not one tribe. The Naga is multiple tribes which have different languages. They were interwarring tribes. They used to raid a lot of the British trade routes in the Northeast. So the British push them aside and put what is called, now we still have it, and I'm sure we've heard, all of us have heard of it, which is called the inner line regulation. They made a regulation in a lot of areas, including Mizoram, and obviously all the other states as well, where you could not enter without a permit. Right now, even people in the Northeast and even us, a lot of people who study the Northeast think that, oh, they demarcated these areas, they brought in these permits so that we can't enter, to preserve their tribal entity. That was not the case. The reason they brought in ILR is so that they cannot come out. They cannot disrupt their trade routes. They cannot kill British soldiers, so it was to keep them away from us. Now, can you believe it? This sort of regulation has still not been removed. And which is very sad, because what does it do? Within your own country, you have to enter a state and you have to take a permit. It's like taking a visa to go to another country. Will that not psychologically make you feel a sense of otherness? Not just you, but also the people who live there. Because if I want to come to your city, Bangalore, I can just take a flight and come because it's my own country. But if I want to go into Nagaland, I want to go into Mizoram, I need to first apply for a permit, see if I get that permit. Of course, you do get the permit, but there was a time I've been traveling the Northeast for over 14 years on field work. Right. There was a time when you used to be scared to apply for the permit because the people who were giving you the permit were all, or at least you were worried that they were associated to the insurgents, so the insurgents would know what you've come for, what you've come to research, and that's not the kind of access that you should need in your own country. And I think that is a huge security issue for us. Now, you also see how the British have cut the what we call the chicken's neck. The chicken's neck is literally almost just a 22-kilometer widthwise road that joins the rest of India with the Northeast. That brings us to a very, very difficult, and it puts us in a very precarious position, because how long is it going to take for, if somebody wants to cut the Northeast out from the rest of India, how long is it going to take us to come through 22 kilometers? Not very long. The kind of access the Northeast also had to the rest of India, is determined by these things, because obviously, you have a permit system, you have you are connected geographically by a 22-kilometer width road. Psychologically, it has a huge impact. It limits integration. Now, also the identity formation that I was talking about earlier, and I was giving you the example of Nagaland. When the missionaries came in, not only did they put this ILR, allowed the missionaries to go in, but they didn't allow anybody else to go in. So Hindu sadhus couldn't go in. There was a particular ban against them. Right. They couldn't go in. So the missionaries had this playground to come and do whatever they wanted to. You have to give it to them that they had the kind of determination to learn their language. The languages were different between the tribes. So they learned their language, they spent a lot of time there, they faced a lot of difficulties. These were wild areas, they lived there. These were missionaries coming in from America. They lived there, they introduced them to Christianity, they created a divide, saying you're Christian, you have nothing to do with the rest of the larger civilization. They converted an entire region, Sharan, in 100 years. Right. It was Nagaland, Mizoram, Manipur. I can safely say that it's only the valley that is Hindu, the rest is Christian. Arunachal Pradesh, people say, actually, our Honorable Minister Kiran Rijiju has also said this, that it's about 40%. But when the census comes up, the new census, I have a feeling it's going to be a lot more than that. On one of my Delhi Think dialogue, there is a gentleman who I've interviewed on my panel, who is one of the largest tribes in Arunachal Pradesh. He is the president of that tribe. And he said he expects it to be about 60%, right? Look at Meghalaya. Meghalaya is also 100%. Arunachal has its problem. Tripura has its problem. So whole region you convert in 100 years. How is that possible? Why does a conversion happen, Charan? It happens because you have some sort of spiritual experience, right? You feel that, oh my God, I associate to what they're saying. Yet it didn't happen in the rest of the country. Why did it happen here? The reason that it happened here is conversion came hand in hand with insurgency. Once they gave them this identity, they gave them a new religion, they gave them a new language, they formed this umbrella under which they brought all these tribes and they said, you guys are not connected to this rest of the civilization, so you must demand for your own separate state. So Nagaland was the first one to demand it. It's called Nagalim for Christ. That is their flag. And they wanted a Christian state. It was backed by a lot of Western powers. And I'm not even going into the real details of the history. There's the Crown Colony. There's, the British wanted to keep this region as a Crown Colony even as they left India. So they were very determined to have this region. Also, you must realize that there wasn't a Christian state in Southeast Asia. So they thought if Nagaland becomes a Christian state, that becomes a base for them in terms of their own security initiatives, After Nagaland, the Mizos took up arms. They wanted a separate state. So I think it has a lot of impact on the rest of the country because this sense of otherness, this sense that we are a separate identity, that we have nothing to do with the rest of the Bharatiya civilization. The idea that we are different because we are Christian is very dangerous. Over and above that, we have porous borders, so we also have problems. We are surrounded by countries that are not very successful. Bangladesh, for example, there's a reason that you have the kind of immigration that you have from there, and that poses a security threat. So to answer your question in the limited time that we have and in the limited way I can at this point, I would say that the proselytization that took place there, the new identity that we have seen been created, has caused them to forget their authentic relationships to the rest of India, lose their collective consciousness. And that finally is a great a point of distress for Bharat because you cannot have these sort of identities that consider them different from the main civilization that we are all a part of.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you for that elaborate answer. And I was actually recalling a lot of my own experiences going to the Northeast, because when you enter there and you are in the line for applying for an inner line permit, but still you feel like you are trying to procure a visa to enter your own country. It's a different feeling. And the feeling of otherization that you mentioned is absolutely right. But we did learn a lot from what you had to say about the deeper reasons behind such conflict existing even after 100 years. That brings me to my last question, Ramiji, since we are running out of time. Now, in the last 7 years, there have been a lot of positive developments in the sense that the intensity of conflicts, the intensity of insurgency has reduced. And also with the Act East policy of the Modi government coming into place, there's a lot of connectivity, an infrastructure boost that's been given to the Northeast. So there are some, positive developments, but still we do see, reports of violence re-emerging once again. What kind of a concern does this cause to us, and why is it re-emerging once again, especially in the context of Meghalaya and a few other states we were discussing?
So I have a little different perspective to this, if I may say so. I feel that there's always been these clashes. There's always been a little violence. For example, we've seen it in Meghalaya as well. HNLC, which is also an armed group, an insurgent group. HNLC attacked the chief minister's house and so on and so forth. The fact of the matter is that this has always been there. We are seeing it in the news because I feel that there's a renewed interest in the Northeast. So now mainstream media is picking up on what is happening in the Northeast. This kind of interest wasn't there before. Nobody bothered to understand it. When Northeasterners tell me that, oh, we feel that we've been alienated by India, I understand why, because we didn't take an active role. Having said that, there is an active movement in the Northeast, where now that has become so internalized, the feeling of alienation, that they don't realize that they might be alienating themselves as well. So, for example, again, in Meghalaya's case, HNLC at one point, 70s, 80s, these kind of groups were really, really active. And the reason they were active were because they were allowed to be active. They asked for all non-Khasis, non-indigenous people of Meghalaya to move out of Meghalaya, right? They have a word which is called Dakar, Dkhar, I think, which means outsider. So they might just say it casually, but the word holds a lot of weightage. This government, like I said, I've been traveling in the Northeast for 14 years, so I've had an opportunity to see it before this government and after this government. And the actual difference that I have seen is that they have managed to bring it back into mainstream consciousness from both ends. The resounding victory of the BJP in Assam is something that cannot go unobserved, because they've come back with they've come back for the second time with a great amount of success and with their agenda straight. Now, coming back to, you'd asked me a question, the first question that you'd asked me, so coming back to this, one of the reasons that we have seen a little bit of this activity happen in Meghalaya also, Mizoram, Assam border also, is because of the success in Assam. Himanta Biswa Sarma is a very, very, his agenda is straight. He's a very strong leader, one of the strongest leaders that we have in the Northeast. With his agenda of, let's say, banning cow slaughter, or with his agenda of preserving culture, indigenous culture, it's riled up a lot of the church insurgency nexus. Right. So the insurgencies they're all Christian insurgencies, right? So your insurgencies cannot happen without, if it's a Christian insurgency, without some sort of moral support, if not more, from the church. Now that's riled up the church a little bit. So a lot of the on-ground response is also that this is a reaction of the church trying to build up this conflict to not just make Assam look bad, but to again prove a point that we are the ones who dictate terms in these areas, not a government, especially not a government with a very straightforward agenda of preserving indigenous culture, as well as Hindu culture, which has been under attack in the Northeast for a really long time. Right. Of course, like you said about the infrastructure, the Act East policy, the reason it had to be changed is because the Look East policy remained just Look East. There wasn't any activity going on. But now with the kind of infrastructure that they've built, especially when it comes to roads, air connectivity, direct flights, it's become accessible once again. So I think that has made a lot of difference to the kind of conflict that we have seen in the Northeast, because eventually, Sharan, people want development. Eventually, they don't want to pick up arms if they have an option. Yes, religiously motivated people will, I mean, they have been manipulated before to create insurgencies. They were the locals who joined these armed groups. But I think they've realized that they were being taken advantage of, that there is no benefit for this. It's only the handful of leaders of an insurgent group that get placed in high positions if there's a ceasefire with the government. And, but yes. Apart from that, I think there's general awareness. And I think the government's done a great job. One of its first declaration when it came into power in 2014 was the NSC and IM ceasefire with the government. Yeah, that is still to come to a conclusion. But the fact that that has been done, is immense because NSC and IM and NSC and K were the most active in this region. So that has been taken down. So I think they are the government is very clear about where they're going, that the Northeast is a doorway to the rest of Southeast Asia, and it can play a balancing power. It can become a balancing power between the West and the East.
Right. So what you're saying in conclusion, Ramiji, is that even though we have seen a few incidents of violence here and there, but largely it has been peaceful. So perhaps this is the residual violence that we are seeing, and it's probably not sustainable, right?
No violence is sustainable. Yes, it can go on for decades and decades and decades, like the Naga insurgency, but eventually the people who suffer are, the people that they claim to be protecting. These incidents of violence will continue, I think, but, on a very small scale. They will not be the way we have seen it before, which was fully armed insurgency, and secessionist movements that came out of that insurgency. I don't think this government is going to allow that or allow any sort of, it's not going to allow this sort of secessionist values to come back up again. Because of their concerted efforts, I think people have also realized that development is the only way to be, and it's the only reason that they have now to kind of look towards the future. Otherwise, what sort of future did they have? Nobody traveled there. There wasn't any tourism. Today, people actively look to go to the Northeast. And I think once the pandemic lifts, because Assam has done such a good, actually all of the Northeast has done such a good job with containing the pandemic, using their indigenous systems and administrative frameworks, that I think it's, people are going to feel safer going to the Northeast than any other part of India, So I think we are on a really good track. I think if this government stays long enough, we will see a completely peaceful Northeast. But as of now, skirmishes, I think, will continue.
Right. I mean, let's hope that it gets completely integrated, not just say politically, but in terms of culturally, socially as well. We do have some bridges that we need to close in, and hopefully that will happen soon. Rami, thank you so much for this wonderful session. It's been extremely an enlightening experience, even for me. Because since we share an interest in similar subjects, it's always a delight to talk about geopolitics and insurgency as well. Thank you so much, and I hope you can join us for future sessions as well.
Karan, thank you so much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to talk about such important topics, and Northeast is very close to my heart. The people of Northeast, I absolutely love, and I wish that mainstream medias and scholars like yourself, the government, continue to keep taking the kind of interest that they take in the Northeast today in the future as well.
Absolutely, I hope the same too. Thank you so much again, Ramiji. Please do join us again, and we will be inviting you.
I will. Thank you.
And for all our viewers, please do like, share, and subscribe. We will be regularly bringing in updates on current affairs. Until then, I'm signing off. This is your host, Sharan Citti.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.